Om Tyageshwaram Ramakrishnam Saradam Matrarupinim Vivekanandamacharyam Natva Vakshyami Shuddhaya Yogena Chittasya Padena Vacha Malam Sharirasya Cha Bhaishajena Yopakarottam Pravaram Muninam Patanjalim Pranjaliranatosmi. In our last class, we concluded this first quarter, Pada, of this Patanjali Yoga Sutras. It is called Samadhi Pada. We saw that was towards the end of that Pada, and we saw that Patanjali deals with many samadhis during those few last sutras, different kinds of samadhis. Many terms he uses. The samadhis are also divided on the nature of the object that it's concentrated upon. It could be grahya, which is receivable, which is outside us, object that is outside us. It could be grahana, which is the instrument of receiving, that is our own mind and senses. Or it could be grihitri, the receiver. Either of it could be the object of meditation. It could be sthula or sukshma, it could be gross object, or it could be subtle object, like panchatanmatras and up to avyakta, prakriti. So, depending on the object of concentration, various names are given to these samadhis. And also the degree of concentration, the depth of concentration, or the purity of concentration. If the object of concentration is, so to say, a mix-up of name, object and knowledge, then it is one kind of samadhi. If it is pure, it is another kind of samadhi. Like that, different stages, different kinds of samadhis are mentioned in those last few sutras, but the culmination is in prasankhana, prajna, or the knowledge of distinction between prakriti and purusha. That is the goal of all these various concentrations and samadhis. That prajna, that is what renders, so to say, the subliminal impressions. It renders them, they are called dagdha bija, like they will be like burnt seeds. This prajna, this knowledge of the distinction between the self and the prakriti, the self and non-self, that will render the samskaras, turn them into burnt seeds kind of thing. And then that will also give rise to paravairagya, wherein even that prajna or prasankhana also will be controlled, and that will lead to kaivalya. The purusha is left to itself. It remains in its own state. So that was the last portion of the last chapter, and that chapter is called Samadhi Pada. The chapter that is starting now is the second chapter, Dvitiya Pada, and it's called Sadhana Pada, the quarter or the chapter that deals with sadhanas or means or upayas. Introducing the Bhashyakara said that the first chapter is for Uttamadhikaris, or aspirants who are highly competent, best aspirants, so to say, highly competent. Their minds are controlled to a great degree. Already their samskaras have been, so to say, attenuated. And for them, that was the pada, that dealt directly with samadhis. And abhyasa and vairagya, those were the means that were spoken of there. The second pada is for those whose mind is not that concentrated, who have an outgoing mind, outgoing tendencies. So, Uttamadhikaris for them is the Samadhipada. The Madhyama and Adhamadhikaris, the middling and the inferior aspirants, for them is this Sadhanapada. How they can undertake the practices mentioned in this chapter and advance in the path of yoga. That is why this chapter has started. Some teachers, they start the teaching of Yoga Sutras with Sadhanapada, and then only they go towards Samadhipada. That's one way of teaching these Yoga Sutras. Traditionally, I mean those who teach traditionally, even within them, some of them start with Sadhanapada. Some start with Samadhipada, few sutras, first few sutras, then come to Sadhanapada, and then again go back to Samadhipada, the remaining sutras. Like that, there are different styles of teaching these Patanjali Yoga Sutras. Why did Patanjali present Samadhipada first and Sadhanapada later? If sadhanas are to be performed first, he should have presented Sadhanapada in the beginning itself. But there are a couple of opinions why it is so. The first is that during those times, most of the aspirants were Uttamadhikaris. So he just composed the first quarter. And then he thought that in future, people will come who will not be so competent. Madhyama and Adhamadhikaris will come in future. So for them, later he composed Sadhanapada and all that. That is one theory, you can call it. The other theory is that he doesn't want to waste time of the competent aspirants. So he gives the best in the first chapter itself. Whatever is necessary for the best aspirants, he gives in the first chapter itself. So they need not go through the Sadhanapada and all that. Their work is done. They follow the practices mentioned in this Samadhipada and attain Kaivalya. Their time is not wasted. That is another theory, whatever you call it. Anyway, so we have started it as it is presented. So we went through the Samadhipada first, and now we are in the Sadhanapada. The first two sutras, Tapah Swadhyaya Ishvara Pranidhanani Kriya Yogaha. Tapah Swadhyaya Ishvara Pranidhanani Kriya Yogaha. Samadhi Bhavanartha Klesha Tanu Karanarthascha. That is the second sutra. Samadhi Bhavanartha Klesha Tanu Karanarthascha. Now, as I said, this pada is meant for middling and inferior aspirants, so that they can undertake the practices mentioned here and advance in the path of yoga. So he is introducing a term called Kriya Yoga. Kriya Yoga. In the first sutra, he is defining what is Kriya Yoga. And he defines it as Tapaha Swadhyaya Ishvara Pranidhanani Kriya Yoga. These three, Tapa, Swadhyaya and Ishvara Pranidhana, these three constitute what is called Kriya Yoga, or what Patanjali calls Kriya Yoga. And second sutra puts this in the context, and that's why we would like to just go through second sutra also, wherein he says, for what is the purpose of this Kriya Yoga? What do we expect to achieve by undertaking or following or practicing this Kriya Yoga? What is it expected to give us? That is what is said in the next sutra, Samadhi Bhavanartha. It will facilitate concentration, Samadhi, and Klesha Tanu Karanarthascha. Tanu Karanam of the Kleshas. It is meant for that. It is meant to facilitate concentration and Tanu Karanam of the Kleshas. Concentration, anyway, we know what it means. Klesha Tanu Karana, again, these are Patanjali's terms. So, again, we will come, next sutra will define what are Kleshas and also different stages of these Kleshas. Tanu Karana is translated as attenuation or weakening. Attenuation or weakening, that is Tanu Karana. And Kleshas again, as I said, it will be it will be listed how many kleshas are there. But klesha means pain. It means pain. So these are translated as pain-bearing samskaras or afflictions. Afflictions, I think that is the most accepted translation. Kleshas, afflictions. These are drives in our heart, which ultimately in the final analysis lead only to pain. And hence they are called afflictions. The drives of the heart, which finally lead to pain, these are called afflictions, kleshas. Attenuation or weakening of these kleshas, of these drives, and facilitating concentration. This is the purpose of practicing Kriya Yoga. So we want to undertake Kriya Yoga for these two reasons. One is to attenuate, weaken our own drives, which ultimately lead to pain. Actually, these are called Yoga Virodhini, which are opposed to Yoga, to attenuate them and to facilitate, to help us concentrate. This is the purpose. So this is the context. We should keep this context in mind as we go through what this Kriya Yoga is. Now, as he has listed three components of this Kriya Yoga: Tapa, Swadhyaya and Ishvara Pranidhana. We are familiar with these words. Tapa, translation of Tapa, 2-3 translations are there. One is austerity, which is very commonly used, mortification, discipline, purificatory actions. So many translations are there. Austerity seems okay. So that Tapa is there, the first component of this Kriya Yoga. Now, the word Kriya Yoga itself needs to be translated. So, the commentator or sub-commentators, they say that, look, yoga was defined as samadhi or chitta vritti nirodha, control of the mental modifications or concentration. That's how yoga was defined. And action and this concentration, they seem to be contradictory. So how can there be any combination of kriya? Kriya means action. Of kriya and yoga. Because yoga is concentration of the mind or control of the mental modifications. And action is physical or mental or whatever, or verbal. So how can this action and control or concentration go hand in hand? So that is offset by saying that yoga sadhanatvena yoga. These practices are called yoga because these are means, sadhanas for yoga, which is concentration. So certain actions which are instrumental in achieving concentration are called Kriya Yoga. So yoga of action, we can translate it, but action which leads to yoga, a set of actions which leads to yoga, a set of practices which leads to yoga, that is Kriya Yoga. That's how Kriya Yoga term is explained. Because as we saw, it is to facilitate concentration. And concentration was defined, yoga was defined as concentration, yoga samadhi. So these actions, they facilitate concentration, hence they are called yoga. So Kriya Yoga is yoga of action or actions that lead to yoga. There are three components: Tapa, Swadhyaya and Ishvara Pranidhana. Tapa is austerity. Now one question comes, what is tapas doing here? You want to concentrate mind, facilitate concentration. Swadhyaya and Ishvara Pranidhana, these should be enough to develop concentration. What has austerity to do with concentration? That question comes. And so after the sutra, the opening statement of the Bhashya is Na atapasvino yoga siddhyati. Na atapasvino yoga siddhyati. Yoga is not possible for an atapasvi, For a person who is not a tapasvi, who has not undertaken tapas, for such a person, yoga is not possible. So, there is Vyasa Bhashya. He makes it amply clear in the first sentence itself that tapas is absolutely necessary for a yogi. He says, why is tapas necessary? Now he explains, Vyasa explains why is tapas necessary. And as we go through the necessity of tapas, we'll understand what it means. See, tapas, we have general idea. Generally, fasting is a very well-known form of tapas. Fasting. Or there are scriptural tapas, Purascharana and all that, performing japa a certain number of times based on the phase of the moon. Like that, there are so many tapas mentioned in the scriptures. Sri Ramakrishna says, speaking truth is the tapas of Kali Yuga. Gita talks of three kinds of tapas, which is more or less comprehensive definition or comprehensive dealing of the subject. It talks of bodily, sharira tapasa, vachika and manasika. That is the bodily austerity, verbal austerity of the speech and austerity of the mind. All the three austerities are mentioned in Bhagavad Gita. That is quite comprehensive. Now, why is austerity necessary? That was the question. You see, Vyasa explains that, look, we have within our heart, within our mind, innumerable variegated impressions, samskaras, of karmas and kleshas, of drives and actions. Innumerable samskaras are there, accumulated over lives. That is within. They are seeking something. And outside there is this lucrative world, inviting what is within us to grab. And there is this continuous natural flow of our whole being, so to say, in the outside world. Physically, mentally, verbally, everywhere, everything we are just rushing out. That is natural tendency, so to say. Now this cannot be curbed without the practice of austerity. This cannot be curbed, these natural tendencies, outgoing tendencies of our whole being. This cannot be curbed without tapas. And unless they are curbed, yoga is impossible. When our whole being is going outward indiscriminately, yoga is impossible. And that is why tapas is necessary, to check these outgoing tendencies of our whole being, so to say. That is the purpose of tapas. Tapas, the word means heat. Tapa means heat. Heat is generally generated when there is friction. When we try to check our own outgoing tendencies, there is that friction. Friction is within ourselves. It is created by ourselves, but there is friction. That's how the word tapa becomes justified. There is friction when we are trying to control our own outgoing tendencies. That causes friction. And that is what tapa is. So in a way, tapa is trying to control our own natural outgoing tendencies that are contrary to practice of yoga. This can be a very generic definition of tapas, taking into account its purpose. It's checking of the outgoing tendencies of our being that are contrary to yoga, to samadhi, to concentration. That is tapas. And of course, it involves discomfort, because we are trying to check what is a natural tendency of our being. It involves discomfort. But then as Swamiji says, nobody achieved great things by sitting in the lap of luxury. Discomfort, if we are not willing to, to accept discomfort, to undergo discomfort, then as Vyasa says in the first statement, we are unfit to be aspirants of yoga. No atapasvino yoga asvatyate. One who is not willing to take the heat, so to say, of fighting with oneself, of controlling these outgoing yogi virodhi tendencies, is not competent to undertake yoga. So this controlling ourselves is extremely essential, and it is the first aspect, first practice in this Kriya Yoga. And unless we have this, the other two will not be effective. That's why Sri Ramakrishna also many times tells this. If we do Svadhyaya and Ishvara Pranidhana, you can do as much as you want. Unless there is tapas, Kleshatanukarana will not happen, Samadhi will not happen. And that is why this tapas becomes very important. Sometimes people take this too far. So the Vyasavashya is covering that aspect also. The classic example is of fasting. We start fasting morning, afternoon, we are fine. You are not eating anything, you are not even drinking water. By evening, your head starts aching, it's reeling, your mind cannot think properly. Where is yoga? Where is Samadhi Bhavana? This fasting is not helping. Chitta prasadanam abadhamanam. That is the word Vyasa uses. This tapas should be chitta prasadanam abadhamanam. It should not obstruct or disturb the tranquility of the mind. The austerity should not disturb the tranquility of the mind. He takes that also into account. As austerity is a very subjective topic. Or they say one person's austerity could be other person's luxury. Because see, we have our own thresholds, our own samskaras, the drive, we have our own. So what constitutes austerity for one could be a luxury for other. So we have to carefully choose our own limits, whichever area, either bodily or mental or verbal, whichever austerity we want to undertake, there is that area which is difficult but doable. That's kind of a spot or area that we have to identify. It should be difficult but doable. So we aim at that, and then we keep pushing boundaries. So that is important that we identify that area in every kind of austerity that we want to undertake. That area of difficult but doable. That we are not disappointed. At the same time, there is some exertion, there is tapas, actual discomfort, which will control the outgoing tendency, so to say. So that control is not for just experiencing the pain. That is not the purpose of austerity. The purpose is to weaken the outgoing tendencies. When they are not given a free hand, automatically they lose their strength. So that is the purpose of this tapas, and that is one aspect of this Kriya Yoga. The other are Svadhyaya and Ishvara Pranidhana. We'll see in our next class. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat. Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.